Everybody, it's Kevin Lau here, your host of the Planning for Retirement podcast, and welcome to another episode. This is episode number 61, and this is going to be called The Benefits of Working in Retirement. And this is going to be a great show. I've got one of our team members of the firm, of my financial planning firm, Roberto Fortuna, joining me on this one. So I'm super excited to introduce Roberto and talk about this topic because he is privy to this topic very well. So I'm really, really excited about this one. Before we jump into the content, before we get into Roberto's introduction, just a quick reminder to make sure to follow the show. If you are listening on podcasts, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, make sure to follow the show. If you're in that PFR Nation sweet spot is what I like to call it. And PFR Nation sweet spot, who is that? These are individuals that are over the age of 50 that are looking to achieve work optional. You're looking to fire your boss, let's say in the next handful of years, or maybe you're already retired. And typically the folks that we work with are not underachievers. You know, a lot of the individuals that we work with, most of the individuals that we work with have well exceeded 7 figures of assets and are approaching even mid 7 figures, upwards of 8 figures. And so even if you're not in that sweet spot, you'll still learn something. So still follow the show. All right. You know, helps us reach more people and helps trick the algorithm to reach more people. But also in addition to that, make sure to subscribe to our channel on YouTube. So in addition to the podcast, which we're doing right now every 2 weeks, I'm also doing some weekly, what I like to call the whiteboard fireside chats, where I just do a little breakdown on some more relevant topics, whether that be from our financial planning practice, or maybe it's from the podcast and sort of doing a little bit of a deeper dive. So last podcast at episode number 60, we did the 5 things to watch in the markets for 2025. And then for the whiteboard fireside chat, I was sipping bourbon in my hotel lobby, but I was talking about the rebalancing process and how important it is to have a defined investment strategy. And then the one that just came out this past Tuesday was the Roth conversion window and what that Roth conversion window is. Because many of the clients that we work with have a majority of their assets are in tax-deferred buckets, okay, tax-deferred vehicles. And I've had the luxury of doing this for pushing 17 years now. And so a lot of the folks that we worked with, sort of the initial baby boomers to retire, most of them retired with mostly tax-deferred accounts, okay? And their advisor, including myself, you know, when I was working at big firms, we could not talk about taxes and they cannot talk about taxes, okay? And so they may not have gotten the advice needed for Roth conversions. And so that was a big part of me launching my own firm back in 2020 was to specifically focus on helping clients minimize their lifetime taxes paid. So the Roth conversion window is a good one for the whiteboard fireside chats. But anyways, all right, this episode, this is a great one. So yes, a reminder, I do this for a living. So I'm not a professional podcaster, okay? And so I've seen firsthand, and we've seen firsthand, the benefits of folks that are approaching retirement or have recently retired, kind of thinking through all of their income streams in retirement, thinking through the psychological benefits of potentially working part-time in retirement. I thought, hey, this would be a great episode to have Roberto join us, all right? And, you know, listen, many of you are probably thinking about this. If you're already retired or approaching retirement, the stats are very clear, okay? The Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies survey, they found that 57% of you are either working part-time in retirement or working in retirement, or you plan to work in retirement at some point in the future, okay? And so that's the majority of you. And, you know, I'd say, you know, with our practice, the percentages are a little bit lower than that, but many of our clients have not yet retired. So even if they are maybe thinking about it, or maybe they haven't yet thought about working in retirement, hopefully this episode brings some clarity on that one. And so I thought this, again, would be a perfect topic for Roberto to join. And, you know, for many of you who have been following this show for a long time, and many of you who are clients of the firm, you know Roberto, okay? You know, Roberto's been in our meeting, very, very involved in our meetings in the financial planning process since, you know, May of last year. So many of you already know Roberto, but for a lot of you, maybe the newer folks that recently followed the show or found our podcast or whatever it might be, you may not know Roberto. And so for those of you that don't know, Roberto is literally the youngest looking retiree on the planet. And so he's going to be talking about, we've got a real life retiree who is working in retirement. So anyways, I'm super excited to have you join, Roberto. Thank you so much for doing this. I know we kind of went back and forth around topics and the timing of this, but I just wanted to first say thank you for jumping on the show today.
Appreciate it.
Roberto's energy. Hey, don't let him fool you. He's excited too. All right. So Roberto, why don't you maybe start before we get into the topic today? Why don't you just maybe kind of tee up, you know, for those of you that are, you know, more maybe newer listeners, or maybe they're not clients of the firm, you know, why don't you give a little background with your career journey and sort of, you know, how we got here to where we are today?
Sounds great. Yeah. So professionally, as Kevin said, I'm probably the youngest looking retiree you'll ever see, but I did a 20-year career in the fire service, which was, a dream come true, to be perfectly honest with you. If I didn't have other ambitions in life professionally and ambitions to relocate, I probably would have continued being a firefighter for the remainder. I wouldn't say of my life, but until a point where it was time to move along. But after 20 years, at age 40, I decided to go ahead and retire, move my family down to Florida. That's where I'm currently located in the Jacksonville area, and decided to then pursue other avenues professionally in life. It's a long journey to get here where I am now to being a certified financial planner. In the fire service, we used to work 24-hour schedule twice a week. So we would have one 24-hour schedule and then 72 hours off. So with that time off, I used to do a ton of other things for experiences. I was a residential window cleaner for a time period. I was a fire inspector for a time period, but I kept getting this nagging feeling that I really liked personal finance and started doing a lot of research into it. I dipped my toe into financial coaching, which was fantastic. I went ahead and got certification as a financial coach. And that was great because I really got to see how to help people develop a budgeting process, how to make financial decisions, how to set goals, how to deal with the inevitable slip up that would happen when we got off track, and being able to move forward from there. But the problem with that was everybody wanted to fix today, one, and then two, they really just wanted to pay the least amount of taxes they possibly could, which I totally understand. With that, I decided to, okay, in addition to financial coaching, I'm going to learn a little bit more about taxation. So I started again with my time off, going around, trying to find different experiences, got set up with a CPA firm to start working with personal income tax returns. So I did that for one season, and then the firm owner suggested that maybe I would go and get my CPA license. I looked into that and I was like, wow, that's a lot of work. I don't know if I'm willing to go back to school to do that. He's like, well, there's another avenue called an agent designation, and he suggested that as well. I looked into that, and that was a lot of work as well, but it was more feasible for my schedule. So I went ahead and enrolled in a study program for that. Went ahead and did my 3 tests for the enrolled agent designation, or credential rather, and did achieve that. So that was great. It's a designation or a credential that is issued by the IRS. It just says there's a certain level of expertise around taxation on the personal side there. With that, I've been doing personal tax returns for the last 5 years as well. As all of us who have done tax returns know, or actually file taxes, when you do them, it's very reactive. And I kept getting that nagging feeling that I really wanted to be proactive, and I wanted to do decision making around planning. So hence certified financial planner came into being. I had been thinking about it previously, but again, it was one of those things you look into, got to go back to college, get the college courses under your belt to be able to sit for the exam. But once I hit that 20-year mark in the fire service, I retired from there. I said, if I'm not going to do it now, I'm never going to do it. One. And two, I was like, at the end of the day, it's what I really want to do. Had been years it was nagging at me. So went ahead and got to that point where I said, I'm going to go ahead and get the college courses taken care of, which I did. And then sat for my exam this past summer. And I did, and I passed. So that was fantastic. That's kind of how we got to where we are now as a financial planner. I don't know how much deeper you want to get into my story. It's pretty deep already.
No, it's great. I think that's good stuff. I mean, so Roberto was one of those migrants during the pandemic from New York down to Florida, so that decision, no regrets there, huh?
No regrets there. If I could have done it earlier, I would have.
Yeah.
But obviously, with the position that I was at, couldn't do that remotely.
Right. So talk about, okay, so, you're pursuing the CFP. I'll just kind of give a little bit of a backstory on this one. So when I started my firm in 2020, it was kind of this really the same thing you were talking about. It's like just like this feeling inside. I'm like, this is the avenue I wanted to pursue. I've been working for big firms for the first 12 years of my career from 2008 to about 2020. And I was just like, listen, it's great. It was a way for me to cut my teeth, learn from really great advisors, but also learn some of the things that I didn't want to do as an advisor. And, I think, just like you mentioned earlier around the tax piece, I hate to just continue to harp on taxes, but it's, for our clients, for PFR Nation, it is actually the top expense for a lot of individuals that we serve. And so this idea of, minimizing your lifetime tax bill as opposed to, tax preparation is a different that's more reactive to your point. So anyway, so the first 3 years was crazy for me launching my firm because, when I did start the business, granted, but when I put my resignation in, we had one child. Okay. My son was like 8.5 months roughly at the time. This was roughly May of 2020. So I put the resignation in, and then the following week, my wife finds out she's pregnant again. And I'm like, dang, okay, that was a little crazy. And by the way, my wife was a stay-at-home mom and still is a stay-at-home mom for full time, but at this point in time. And I was like, okay, that's a little crazy, but you know what? Listen, I'm going to keep the faith. This is the path I believe I'm destined to go on. So anyways, I did not know 1 month later it was going to be twins. Okay, that was really crazy. So at the time when we launched Imagine Financial Security, we had 3 boys under the age of 2. It was super stressful. I mean, but there was so much energy around it just because I felt like, okay, this is this is like aligned with my purpose. And like, yes, I'm doing the same type of work. I've been a practicing CFP, I think for now 14 years. I'm doing the same type of work, but we have more of we have a deeper relationship and a deeper understanding of our client's financial situation because we can serve them in a different way. But those first 3 years were a grind. And really what changed for me in the beginning of 2024, I was reading some Dan Sullivan books. And one of the books that just nailed me, just hit me right across the jaw was Who, Not How. And, I was doing all of the hows, I was trying to figure it all out, myself. And a big part of that was because I was living on savings, launching the business. I didn't have daddy's trust fund, just writing me a check every single month. We had saved and invested well from 2008 to 2020. We were very blessed, very fortunate, investing in traditional investments, investing in real estate. And so we had a little bit of a backdrop, but it's still painful to just burn down your cash nest egg every single month. So I had this mindset of scarcity. It was like, hey, I needed to keep every dollar of revenue and to feed my family. And that's truth. But the result of that, it was a lot of chaos those first 2.5, 3 years because we were growing still pretty aggressively. There's a lot of demand for the type of work we do. And I think this idea of being location independent has really changed the game. I talked about this in one of the previous episodes as well of searching for a financial advisor. Is like the cool part about post-pandemic is that you don't need to be next door to your advisor and gonna like shuck it up at the country club. Like you don't really need that. You can hire someone who's regardless of where they are in the country. And if they understand your situation and they can serve you well, you could potentially have a much better relationship with that type of advisor virtually. And so, again, we were growing and, I was doing all of the hows, myself. I was not finding the right who's. And so I said, okay, the first thing I need to do, I need to find someone to help me with the service related issues. So for onboarding new clients, doing the paperwork, et cetera. And so in March of 2024, we brought on Amy Levesque, who's been a phenomenal, her title is Client Services Associate. And so she's been phenomenal just to take that service burden off my plate. So if there's any distribution needs or just paperwork, just all of the minutia that I do not like to do, she has been a godsend helping take that off of my plate. Okay. So that was really my first desire is to find some help there. And then I thought, hey, maybe in a couple of years, maybe in a year, I'll bring someone else on to help me with the actual financial planning work. Well, literally like a month later, I think it was Roberto, right? Didn't you reach out? I think so. Roberto reached out to me like a month later. And so, had this angle of, hey, I'm doing the CFP track, I'm an aspiring financial planner, this is my second act, so to speak, and would love to pick your brain on the CFP track, Roberto. So why don't you talk about that conversation real quick?
Funny conversation. So yeah, just like Kevin said there, I reached out to him. I think it was probably March, April 24. Like he said, I just wanted to pick his brain. I asked him if he would be open to just meeting for some coffee. He was more than willing. So we met up a couple weeks later and I just started asking a couple of questions. I think I had like 5 or 10 questions I wanted to ask. And, after like 45 minutes, I wanted to be respectful of his time. I was like, I appreciate everything. And Kevin's like, oh, we're just going to, you got anything else? Let's just keep talking a little bit more. And so I think we just hit it off right then and there, to be perfectly honest. And, he was like, I don't know if this is just timing or what. He's like, but, he's like, I was actually looking to potentially bring a paraplanner on, maybe sooner than later. He's like, is that something you might be interested in? And I'm sitting there and I'm, in my head and I'm like, wow, this is phenomenal here. I was like, I'm asking for a little bit of advice. And here's this opportunity that just falls at my feet to actually start learning how financial planning is done in the real world as opposed to just in the textbooks and through the college courses. And they do go side by side, but there is a specific way that the textbooks want to do it. And then in real life, like anything else, it's done a different way. Not
because you're working
different.
with real people. You know what I mean? You're not working with some hypothetical individual that has no emotions. We're emotional individuals and human beings. And so that conversation was really cool because, again, the angle was, reaching out to me, just to pick my brain on the CFP track. And again, in my mind, I was like, I'd love to bring someone on that can help me with the financial planning piece, but also has tax experience. Okay. I've never filed tax returns in the past. And I'll just tell you this story really quickly, Roberto. I told you I was going to just drop this little funny nugget on this one. A year before, Roberto, I think, hit me up. Was it on Facebook or email or something like that? I don't know if you remember this or if you were just blasting a bunch of people. But in 2023, Roberto reached out to me and I totally ghosted him. Okay. I'm sorry for that, Roberto. And the reason is because I was in the trenches. Okay. I had 3 boys under the age of 3 at that point in time. I was in the trenches. I was not in this mindset of hiring. And I think your angle was, hey, I'm looking to join a firm, da, 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 da. And I liked your pitch on that one, but I was like, I'm not at capacity to do that. But Roberto Fortuna, name I'm not going to forget. Okay. Very unique name. So when you reached out to me, I guess it was like 8 or 9 months after that, I was like, all right, I'm going to take this guy for coffee. We're going to talk about the CFP track. But I was just more in this mindset of who, not how. And I was like, I just felt like the stars were aligning. I was like, this could be a great fit potentially. And it really was. I just, even though Roberto at the time, he was, again, the personal coaching, the financial coaching and the firefighting, as a firefighter and helping folks with all those defined benefit decisions and pension decisions and even social security decisions. Like I think Roberto's kind of downplaying his experience in financial planning, but his desire to learn and like, there's no one that listens to more podcasts and reads more books about financial planning than Roberto Fortuna. I'm just telling you right now, the things that he's asking me, I'm like, how do you know you're not even a CFP yet? This was last year. He did achieve a CFP, but I was like, how do you even know to ask me this question? But it's because he's been deep into this topic for probably about a decade plus, at this point in time. And so, but then that tax experience was critical for me. I was like, this is like, I'm going to find a way. I'm going to find the money to hire Roberto. I'm going to just figure this out because the tax experience has been critical because, listen, we review our clients' tax returns. You know what I mean? We want to look at our clients' previous 2 years of tax returns because that impacts things like their tax bracket, like their income-related monthly adjustment amounts, okay? And even though from a financial planning perspective, I understand what are those concepts we need to look for, Roberto knows where to find them on the tax return and where those opportunities are and even find areas where it's like, hey, we missed something here or the tax preparer missed something there. And that's an awkward conversation. Like, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Client, your tax preparer is screwed up. So even though we're not preparing the tax returns for clients, this experience of the tax experience for me, I was like, all right, we've got we need to figure this thing out. And so, we were like, let's just give it a try. I guess that we started May of last year. And, we've been kind of in this like different phases, like phase 1, let's see if this was working. And then we kind of moved into phase 2 because we're like, it is working. And then phase 2, we're like, okay, maybe we'll kind of give you a little bit more responsibility. And then Roberto achieved the CFP. And then we were like, hey, let's get into this phase 3 thing. Let's kind of take some of the training wheels off a little bit. And, now we're sort of in this phase 3, 3 piece. And even, Roberto mentioned, his title officially is paraplanner. But, we've got a promotion in Q1 that we're going to be giving Roberto very, very, very soon. Okay. So we're announcing it here on the podcast on that one. So we're just super excited and our clients are so thankful to have Roberto as part of the team because, my clients, they know me pretty well. They know that I've been doing this for a long time, but they also recognize like, hey, Kevin's also running a business too. He can't do all of these things himself. And so having people like Amy on the team, like Roberto on the team has been critical. And Roberto's, so you kind of like in this mindset of like, okay, you're officially retired from as a firefighter. I know your wife, Danielle, she's also a teacher, so she's got sort of that same kind of setup in terms of, pension, but both are in your 40s. You're young, you're young retirees, right? So did you always kind of know like, hey, I'm going to do something? I already know the answer to this, but like, when were you kind of like, hey, I'm going to pursue something else, almost this like second act? Like, when did that really kind of become an aha moment to you? And sort of like, I guess, sort of in your seat now, like, let's let's maybe kind of transition into some of those benefits. We'll even start with maybe some of the financial benefits. But like, yeah, I guess when did you kind of know, like, hey, I'm going to be pursuing the second act in retirement?
Great. We'll get to that in a second. I just got to go back to your story here. So, yes, I absolutely remember reaching out 8 or 9 months prior to us meeting. I
Oh,
had,
good. All
like
right,
Kevin
great.
said, I don't think I like cold called anybody, but I definitely sent emails to about 4 or 5 people within like a 30-mile radius of where I currently moved. And nobody got back to me. Not one, not one. Still got back to me. But with that
Oh,
said, I waited a couple months. In that time period I guess I can transition now to the question. I had taken a couple of months, didn't do any employment, any work anywhere. And I was like, wow, I'm just way too young to 40 to just be retired. Never really considered that to be the case anyway. With 2 boys, teenage boys, you're always busy. So I wouldn't say tired from life, just retired from employment. But even with that,
yeah.
I was missing a sense of purpose and structure, things of that sort. So I did actually go take a position as a test administrator in a testing facility. So I did that for
Hmm.
about 6 months just to try it out, try something new in life, see if it was something I'd be interested in doing. And it was fine. Met great people while I was there, but I still had that nagging feeling. I know what I really want to do. I want to do
Mm.
financial planning. So I resigned from that position. And that's when I put my nose to the grindstone and started back into college courses to, achieve the CFP. But I guess back to your question on the second act, when did I know? If that was the question, I think I knew years in advance. I just kept
Mm.
putting it off and putting it off until the point where I was like, I don't want to get to a stage later in life where I would look back and regret not putting the effort forward to doing something that I knew I would like. And like you alluded to earlier, I feel like I knew I would like doing this and enjoy it and find a lot of purpose and have it being very gratifying for me is because when I was in the fire department, I was doing financial coaching while I was there. So I got that part of it. But like you had said, like
Mm.
between pension options and trying to project a little bit into the future, I was doing that for myself. And then as I was talking to other guys that are getting ready to retire, we would have these discussions and I would kind of be the unofficial retirement guy to guys who'd ask me a bunch of questions about it. And I knew our pension system kind of in and out and how to project forward. I think it's fairly basic, but that's because I was into it. Most people are
Mm.
not into it, and that's not something that they're looking to get into, to be perfectly honest. They just want some assistance. And I found a lot of joy in doing that. So
Hmm.
that's kind of how I knew that would be the second act. If I was going to go after something, that's kind of how I really knew I would find a lot of joy in doing this.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, that we talk a lot about the purpose and that sort of that social connection. And so we'll sort of like break this down. There's like 3 different kind of categories of benefits. You've got the purpose and social connection. You've got the psychological and even physical health benefits to staying engaged in working retirement. But then, of course, we've got the financial. So we'll hit on all 3 of those. But why don't we start with the purpose and social connection piece? Because I think we've talked a lot about purpose. Roberto even created this questionnaire for new prospective clients and even existing clients to fill out. What was it called again? It was like the purpose and retirement questionnaire, something along those lines. We should share that actually in the link. Let me put a note on that one. Let's share that questionnaire. You know what I'm talking
Questions
about? I think
for
this.
purposeful and successful transition to it.
Yeah, I thought it was a phenomenal. It's just a PDF, nothing fancy, but just the questions to kind of just get the wheels turning because we were doing some research on this one before hitting record on this one, and the longevity statistics are pretty eye opening. Someone who's 63 today, there's a 59% Monte Carlo, at least in our the studies that we're looking, 59% chance that they're still going to be alive at age 90. Now, that's a 27-year span in potential retirement. That's a pretty darn good chance. And there's a 48% chance that they're going to make it to 93. So that's a 30-year time horizon that there's a 50-50 shot that they're going to get to. And, I think this idea of like, hey, what are you going to do every day? A lot of people kind of have this mindset of like, or not this mindset, it's like this picture of retirees like 20 years ago. And they're retired. They're like super old on a beach and they're like sipping a Corona, but they can't even like get up to go into the water. It's like, that is totally different. Like our PFR Nation type of folks. I mean, they're active. frankly, we even have clients that are in their early 80s that are like running the show on nonprofits. I mean, they're taking trips to Scotland and like overseas. So, I think this idea of staying healthier longer is a factor on thinking about working in retirement, because it's not necessarily working in retirement, in my opinion. It's like they're work optional. They're not working because they need the money. You know what I mean? Obviously, we'll talk about the financial benefits, but they're not working because they need the money. They're doing something because it's exciting for them. And you don't have to get into your financial situation, but we've kind of talked about this where you're like, Kevin, I'm kind of like in that work optional spot, with your situation, with your wife working and almost retired as well. But, I think this idea of purpose in retirement is a big reason why folks are really kind of gravitating towards this. And I threw out that stat earlier, the Transamerica study, where it said that 57% that are currently retired or plan to retire are going to be working in retirement. And so, I think that's the majority right there. And so that's very interesting. If you compare that to our stats, I looked at our client list, again, the numbers are closer to 25%, but let's say 25 to 60%, obviously that's a pretty wide range, are looking to do this in retirement. And again, I know for our clients' sake, it is not for the financial benefits, number one. It's mostly for this idea of purpose in retirement. So like, how have you found kind of that? I know you're a big purpose in retirement kind of individual, or just purpose in life in general, but I guess what is your reaction to those studies and just this idea of longevity in retirement?
The way that I try to look at it is you have to have something to get up every day for, something to look forward to, something to have some purpose for. I do remember a guy that I used to work with, and he told me, he was like, work to me, at least the way he said, work to me is like oil for a machine. He's like, if you don't have some of it for life, you're just going to rust. So I could see how some people would think that way, and others would say, no, absolutely not. Once I do my 30, 35, 40 years of work, teaches his own. But yep, there are those issues that come in, especially in those first couple of months, maybe even year of retirement, that during that transition that I've seen many older firefighters, once they do it, once they retire, and not just for firefighters, anybody, that loss of identity, loss of structure, the loss of the relationships, part of being a bigger purpose, the ability to, affect change on a daily basis, whether it's with coworkers or whomever, to try to replicate that in one way, shape, or form, even if it's part-time, or even if it's not part-time, or it's not for compensation, it's just for volunteering. I see that as very, very valuable. I don't even know if that was, where you were going with that, but those initially are the things I think of when we talk about like that purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so true. It's like, that loss of identity is a big one. This idea of like kind of being depressed in retirement. I think it's partly because of like kind of that loss of identity. It's like, again, a lot of you, the PFR Nation, you were not the slackers. A lot of you were running companies, you're executives at companies, you're entrepreneurs, you're physicians, you're attorneys. You were kind of the guy or gal, the go-to person to affect change and make an impact. And I'm thinking about one of our clients that, she retired, I think, around 2016-ish. So we've been working with her for just over a decade, a couple of years before she retired. But I remember working with her as she was transitioning. She was an orthodontist, and she sold her practice. And, I remember that first few years, there was a little bit of that. I kind of got a sense that she was missing it a little bit. And the individual that she sold the practice to was not necessarily like a close friend, but a very close acquaintance that she knew and trusted with her patients. And that's why she chose that individual to buy the practice. It wasn't like, hey, I'm going to go out and sell to private equity. Like, she was very intentional about who she wanted to sell her practice to. But I remember this one time that doctor had to go out on medical leave or to take care of a family member, something along those lines. And, basically tapped her on the shoulder and said, hey, can you help the patient? The patients, the practice probably better than I do. Can you help out? And I remember after that, like 3 or 4 month stint, she was like, I have so much energy. I'm so excited. Like, she had a purpose. And before that, I think she was watching the news a little bit too much. I was hearing from her a lot around, especially during the pandemic, early 2020. I was like, hey, calm down a little bit, but it's difficult. Emotions run high with politics, with the markets, et cetera. But I think this idea of like purpose to kind of like turn off the TV, turn off social media, turn off the news, and kind of do something that is making an impact. And I think sort of this idea of longevity and, that folks are just living longer. they have so much to give. You and PFR Nation, that are over 50, a lot of you in your 60s already, and you're like, hey, you know what? I want to retire from this job that I'm a little bit burnt out, but I want to do this. Maybe working in a nonprofit. I mentioned a couple that we work with, I've worked with for several years now. They are running several nonprofits. I'm like, and they even told me one time, they said, Kevin, I don't even know how I had time to work. They're so busy, and they're excited, but they're still traveling. It's not like they're like chained to the desk every day. It's like they have a little bit of this purpose, and then they're doing things. They're doing fishing trips with their grandkids. They're going overseas. They're traveling still. And so I think, you can still kind of have that retirement cake and eat it too, if you will. Just because you're quote unquote doing something or working doesn't mean you're doing it because you need the money. And it's like, I think that's like the first act a lot of folks are kind of doing, is it's like, oh man, I need to do this. I need to feed my family. I need to pay the bills, etc. But then when they get to this work optional, that's why we like to talk. I don't like the word retirement anymore. I like this idea of financial independence, work optional, and sort of just picturing, hey, what would you do if work was optional? I think that's kind of what we're getting to when it comes to purpose. But let's talk about the psychological and the health benefits, right? So, looking on this study here, the improved mental health, I looked at the study from 2020. The National Bureau of Economic Research found that retirees who engaged in part-time work reported a 25% lower rate of depression compared to those who are fully retired. And so, they're kind of stating, I guess, some of the reasons for isolation. It's kind of this, again, the loss of purpose kind of goes hand in hand with that as well. But another one on this one right here as well is the Harvard Health Study indicates that working, particularly in roles involving light activity, physical activity, can reduce mortality rates by up to 15% compared to like the sedentary retiree. So, you just kind of think of those types of things, and then the cognitive function as well. The Journal of Aging and Health shows that continued engagement in work or intellectually stimulating activities slows cognitive decline by 30% among retirees. I think that's a big one right there, because again, with longevity comes the risk of dementia, Alzheimer's, those types of cognitive decline. And I think that's a big concern for a lot of individuals. I know, my dad, he's been retired for like part-time retired for many, many years, but just officially put in his notice to fully retire this year. But he worked several years in retirement. And I think a big part of that was sort of preventing this cognitive decline and that social interaction. And so I think that's really a big one as well, is just really the health benefits of continuing to have that purpose and continue to have that daily routine. Is just it kind of promotes longevity. It promotes cognitive stimulation, which ultimately it reduces depression, reduces isolation, which I think what we're all looking for is just, kind of like a happy and enjoyable retirement. But that's not to say, though, that you can't say, hey, you know what? I've been a 35-year career. I'm burnt out. I'm going to give me 5 years, give me 3-4 years. You're work optional. And that's kind of the beauty of work optional, is like, you can make it what you want. You can make this next chapter whatever you want. Like, you don't have to call it retirement. I know this podcast is called Planning for Retirement, but ultimately you can kind of make retirement whatever you want to do. And so, maybe you kind of create this idea of work optional, and that you have like a 5-year stint where you're like, you know what, I'm going to just travel all these bucket list trips that I wanted to do, taking cruises. Maybe it's some golf trips you wanted to go on, St. Andrews, Bannon Dunes, whatever you want to do those things. And then you're like, okay, then I'm going to kind of rethink what I do. I actually remember this client I worked with, but way back in the day, he was the CEO of a hospital, and obviously very important role. And he retired. And I remember those first few years, he was kind of feeling a little bored. I remember they did like a 6-month cruise, and he came back from it. He's like, Kevin, that was the worst trip of my life. His wife wanted to do it, so he was like, I'm going to entertain her, and she wants to do this. But when he got back, he was like, what else? Well, I want to do something else. And so he actually got tapped into, he's like a transitional CEO for hospitals. And so hospitals that lost a CEO for whatever reason, he kind of steps in as an interim CEO. And, so I think you can kind of design retirement however you want to design it. And so I think the health benefits kind of really correlate directly into the purpose in retirement, if you will.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That idea of a phased retirement is also something that, people have, I guess, reported that has helped with, I guess, loneliness is a good way to put it. And I know that has been talked about a lot. I think that past Surgeon General said loneliness is one of the new epidemics of, our time, that people are just very lonely and they're behind their screens, and the ability to get out. And even if it's part-time or, like you said, take a year off or just try different things. You can try part-time employment at the local hardware store for 6 months. And if you don't like that, try something else. But
Yeah.
having opportunities to be more professional is fantastic.
And I think that mentorship is like, I'm so big on this one because, when I started in this business, back in 2008, I mean, all of my mentors for the most part were over the age of 55, they've been seasoned veterans. And that was really by design. Like, I didn't want to like talk to someone who's been in the industry for 3 or 4 years. I'm like, we're in the same boat. Like, you don't know what you're doing. I don't know what I'm doing. So I intentionally found advisors that I looked up to that I was like, hey, I want to practice like yours. Like, you're doing this the right way. I want to practice like yours. And, most of them were over the age of 55. Some were even in their 80s. I remember this guy sat next to me. He was the former managing partner of the firm I worked for right out of college. And I was in the bullpen making cold calls, at age 22. And I remember he peeked his head over. He was the former managing partner, but he came into work literally just for purpose. And he said, "What? You're going to do well in this business." Like, that's what he said to me. I was like, oh, that was a nice thing to say. But I just, I kind of leaned on those types of mentorships. And, I feel like all of you in PFR Nation, because like I said, you guys are sort of the movers and shakers. You're the ones that are making an impact in your communities. And I think this next generation, Generation Z, is craving mentorship because, like you said, this isolation, being behind your screens, there's so much of that. And that's not going anywhere. I'm not going to come out and say, like, let's get rid of social media. That would kind of like kill our business. You know what I mean? Like, we're online, we're a virtual business, but, we are about relationships. And I think this next generation of workers can really benefit from the Gen Xers, I like to call us the geriatric millennials, and then of course the baby boomers that are already retired or planning to retire soon, and just sort of learning from all of you. And so there's so many ways that you can give back to your local community: online, mentorship, coaching, maybe it's consulting, maybe you're actually even getting paid for it. And so I think there's so many options in terms of what you can do in retirement now. And I think technology has a lot of ways helped that, but then there's also some risks, like you mentioned, of technology, of like the isolation. And I know with us, Roberto, when you joined my firm, I was living in your neck of the woods. You know what I mean? And then literally like 2 months later, I was like, hey, by the way, I'm moving to Chattanooga, Tennessee, so to be near my wife's family. And you were like, what's going on? So obviously, I'm still intentional about coming back to Jacksonville to not only see you but also see our clients there. But like, I guess speak on that. I mean, you're kind of working in this virtual type of business. Like, how has that been for you from like a socialization standpoint?
To be honest, I find that it satisfies that, I don't want to say need for interaction, social interaction, but for me, meeting online is, I don't want to say just as good, because there's nothing like shaking a hand or giving a hug, in real life, but it's good enough. It definitely fulfills that need to be able to look on a screen. It's almost like looking in straight into your face and have a conversation. It's been good. I'll just leave it at that.
Good. That's good.
It has been good.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we also get to interact. It's not just like me, Roberto, Amy, just chatting. We get to interact with our clients, which is awesome. And so we get to hear their stories about their travel and their grandkids and the new boat they just bought for a fishing trip. Like, so we get to hear a lot of these cool stories. And so I think, for our business, we do have the social interaction, but for some businesses, it is pretty lonely. And truthfully, like when I was a one-man show, pre-2024, doing it all myself, yes, I had the clients, I was working with the clients, but I think this, having you and Amy join the firm has been key. Because like, my wife, she's in the trenches with the boys, and it's like, I love my boys, but they're little kids. It's like, I think just having that adult interaction, that social interaction is so key, not only pre-retirement, but also in retirement as well. Let's hit on some of the financial benefits. Obviously, we talk about retirement planning. A lot of people want to know the financial benefits, but I think, the three that we came up with that I want to hit on is, number one, improving your savings longevity, your retirement savings longevity, reducing your rate of withdrawal. That can kind of go hand in hand in category number one. We've got healthcare costs mitigation. I know this is a big one. And then number three, we have offsetting inflation. But let's start with like the increasing savings longevity. This is truthfully a big part of a lot of folks' strategy, especially if they're kind of running a little bit tight. Like, let's say we're running some stress tests on their plan. We started with the Monte Carlo analysis, which is a stress test of 1,000 different hypotheticals for rates of return. Maybe we've kind of said, hey, what if we went through a bear market? What if we went through a recession? And maybe their plan is kind of running tight, based on their spending level, based on their income sources, based on what they've saved. And, a lot of folks, when they were planning for retirement 20 to 30 years ago, they were thinking, hey, I want to get to $1 million. Now $1 million, it's kind of borderline, for a lot of folks, based on inflation and just, costs in general, just going through the roof. I feel like, the $1 million number is probably closer to about $2 million these days. in terms of, hey, you're probably pretty comfortable. If you have $2 million portfolio, you've got Social Security pension maybe. But I think this is a big one where if someone's plan is running a little bit tight, and Roberto, we've kind of run these stress tests in our financial planning tools and our software. You've kind of seen the benefits of just pushing back that start date of your rate of withdrawal. It's like, hey, instead of taking 5 or 6% in when you're 62 or 63, hey, you know what? Maybe kind of ease into it. Work part-time for 3 or 4 years. That was the last podcast episode I did for the Whiteboard Retirement Plan. I was talking through that exact concept of using part-time work to fill the gap, to supplement pension, supplement Social Security, to delay those rates of withdrawals. And that improved their financial plan dramatically. Now they're off and running. Now they're withdrawing from the portfolio and they're comfortable. But you've seen that impact of like just pushing it off a few years is such a big deal when it comes to the longevity of your portfolio.
Yeah, absolutely. The ability to take a smaller withdrawal rate out of your portfolio, the impact of that can be just very surprising. It was surprising to me when I first started looking at it, but applying it's pretty surprising. Back to that work optional and or phased retirement, it can make a huge impact if you're like, hey man, I gotta work for the next 3 years full time to hit this goal and then I can retire. Or you're like, you know what, I may be able to just work 7 or 8 years part time. The stress level is a lot lower and I don't have to worry about taking as big of a withdrawal rate out of my portfolio, as opposed to if I could just work a little longer, even at a part-time rate, there's a potential for that. So a little bit more lifestyle balance.
Yeah. And we've also run into several cases over the last year where it's like, we've got to have the opposite side of the spectrum where clients are maybe pretty well funded. You know what I mean? Like their plan's not really running tight, but they're sort of in this like saving mindset where they're like, I just need to continue to max fund my 401k and the backdoor Roth and the mega after tax. Like they're just saving so much for retirement. They're saving 30 to 40% of their income. And then we run these stress tests. We're like, hey, what if you didn't save anything for retirement, for the next 5 years? Like, what would that do? And they can still achieve their desired lifestyle in retirement. And then that kind of gets the wheels turning of like, oh, wait, I don't need to work this job that I hate for the next 5 years. I can maybe transition to do something else, make half of what I'm making now, but I'm good. I don't need to save and invest anymore, right? Because I've achieved that sort of like, we call it the coast fire, coast financial independence to retire early. They've kind of hit that number where they're like compounding interest over the next X number of years, whatever that number of years is going to get them to their desired retirement goal at some point in the future. And therefore they can fire their boss from the job they don't like and do something that they want to do and almost kind of start that second act earlier than they thought. I think that's a really cool conversation to have with folks, because I think a lot of you in PFR Nation are that. You're not the ones that are kind of running tight. You're sort of the ones that are like, you're probably overfunded for retirement. And I think, hearing from professionals that can tell you that with not 100% certainty, because there's always uncertainty with the markets and inflation and interest rates. What's the Fed going to do? What's the new administration going to do? What is our tax policy in the future? But if we kind of put our heads together and say, here are our best assumptions that we believe are going to happen over the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, and here's how you're shaping up towards your retirement goal, I think that's a big benefit to working with a professional, a third party, not your spouse, not your sibling, and not your adult child, working with a third party individual who's done this for a living, for many years. That is a big benefit. And so I think it can kind of go both ways of like kind of transitioning into retirement, that coasting to retirement, or kind of supplementing income to kind of delay those rates of withdrawals, and also delaying Social Security. We didn't talk about that. It's like, hey, maybe they're working part-time because they want to take advantage of that compounding 8% a year on their Social Security benefit. And for those of you that don't know about this, once you hit full retirement age, whatever that is for you, whether it's 66 or 67 or somewhere in between, once you hit that full retirement age, that's called your primary insurance amount. That's kind of your full retirement benefit. But if you continue to delay, each year you do so, you compound your Social Security benefit by 8% annually. And so a lot of folks are interested in doing this to protect against inflation, okay? Especially if maybe their spouse, and also longevity, especially if their spouse is maybe 5 or 10 or 15 years younger. They're like, hey, I'm pretty likely to outlive my spouse. I have the higher benefit. I want to go ahead and delay my Social Security until 70. That way, if and when I do predecease that individual, my spouse, they're going to have the maximum benefit payout because you delayed until 70. That's a big reason a lot of folks want to delay Social Security. So working part-time can kind of help fill that gap financially to sort of allow those benefits to compound. But healthcare is a big one too. All right. So I looked at this one. according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, the average premium for ACA coverage is about $8,000 per year. So healthcare cost goes up. And so I say 8,000, and that sounds high. My personal family policy, I'm going to just throw this out there right now, $2,000 a month. Okay. Health insurance is a racket. Okay. In the US, it is nauseating. All right. But 8,000 compared to what you've paid for your employer before you retired, it's like, that's a lot, especially if you're like retired military. A lot of retired military, like, oh man, I have to pay for health insurance. And I'm like, your premium's $300 a year. Okay. Oh, well, I wasn't paying anything. And okay, let's not talk about that. All right. But I think, this idea of, hey, if you're not eligible for Medicare yet, right? If you're not 65 yet, maybe you retired early, you're 60 years old. You're like, hey, you know what? I can coast to retirement, but healthcare is kind of painful right now. Okay, you can kind of think through, hey, maybe you get a job that allows for you to work part-time and get their healthcare benefits to kind of bridge that gap until 65. Or you can obviously just bite the bullet and just buy a policy on the exchange. You know what I mean? So what are your thoughts on that, Roberto?
Totally makes sense there. That kind of go back to one of those fire things that you said, like Baristify. That's the idea around that, is that, you get a part-time job, barista, Starbucks, whatever, a little bit of income, and also the ability to take advantage of healthcare plans. And if that's not the case, and you want to go on the Affordable Care Act and the exchange, if you can keep your income low, then you can qualify for premium tax credits and be able to get healthcare, reasonable healthcare for a very reasonable rate, if not almost free.
Next to nothing.
So, if almost not free. So definitely an option there too, if you can keep your income to a certain level.
Yeah, I throw the $2,000 a month for my family. Like our policy, let's say a year or two ago, we were paying around the $1,200 range, so still higher than the national average. But like my wife was complaining about these policies on the ACA because they're basically catastrophic coverage. Like the deductible on a lot of these policies are like $15,000. So it's basically catastrophic coverage. Like if you have cancer, like it's going to protect against sort of that upper limit. But yeah, the ACA subsidies, especially in that first couple of years in my business, when my income was basically nothing, like all of my revenue was just getting eaten up by expenses. Like I had pretty substantial ACA subsidies that first 3 years, for premium tax credits. And I think a lot of early retirees actually work part-time or continue to work until 65 just because it's like, hey, I just want to get to Medicare. Not realizing, well, if you're retired, all of a sudden your modified adjusted gross income is going to go way down. Maybe you're delaying Social Security, right? Maybe you don't have a pension yet. Okay, so literally you have no earned income and your only passive income is maybe dividends from stocks you own, maybe interest income from taxable bonds, obviously municipal bonds. You need to add that back into the equation, but maybe capital gains. Maybe you're taking distributions out of your brokerage account, but so you're taking some capital gains, but you're also able to offset some of those gains with potential tax loss harvesting you did back in 2022, right? Hopefully you did that. If not, look for those opportunities going forward with your brokerage account. Harvest those losses, periods of volatility, take advantage of those losses, sell those assets at a loss. A lot of people kind of are very, very, what client I'm talking about, she's a CPA. She was like, Kevin, Roberto, like, I was always trained, like, you never want to sell low. What we explained to her, hey, Mrs. Client, well, you were selling this asset. We're going to take the loss. We're going to turn it into from an unrealized loss into a realized loss. Now we're going to go ahead and replace that asset with something else that's not substantially identical, okay, to avoid the wash sale rules. Now we have those capital gains that we can carry forward for the next 3, 4, 5, 6 years into early retirement. So even those capital gains are kind of being wiped away by carry forward losses. Now all of a sudden their modified adjusted gross income is going way down. So even though the premium, the sticker price for the ACA policies may be $8,000, maybe it's $2,000 even. If you have the Cadillac plan like my family, my wife made me get the Cadillac plan because our boys go to the ER every day. I'm like, what is going on? So she was like, Kevin, this is ridiculous what we're paying, which I agree. So anyways, hopefully that works in 2025. Hopefully, pray to the Lord, no ER visits this year, but that with 3 boys, it's going to happen. But maybe that's the sticker price, but you can use those ACA premium subsidies to essentially say, hey, thank you, Obamacare. I'm going to use your premium tax credit to offset my premium, whether you take it in advance or when you file your taxes for the previous tax year. So I think, healthcare can kind of go several different ways on that. So, kind of the bridge the gap to 65. But even if you do retire before 65, you're not eligible for Medicare. Maybe one spouse is not eligible for Medicare. It's not the end of the world. now you've got to do some smart tax planning. You know what I mean? Now you need to have your financial advisor review your tax return, right? And say, hey, what's your modified adjusted gross income? Let's run some projections for this year. Let's run some projections for the next year, because that will sort of unlock some of these potential premium subsidies that you might be eligible for. Offsetting inflation. I mean, I think that's an obvious one, right? I mean, I think inflation's been painful, over the last few years, topping at 9% in 2022. I talked about this as one of the 5 things that the market's watching for in 2025 is inflation. That's going to directly impact what the Fed does with interest rates this year. Another angle I'll kind of throw on the financial side is like kind of offsetting a bear market, or a downturn in the market. It's because a lot of folks there's been studies out there time and time again that show if you retire and in the first 2 years you go into a bear market, for those of you that don't know, a bear market's a 20% or more dip in the market from a previous high, you have a much higher likelihood of outliving your assets based on your initial projections going into retirement. On the flip side, maybe you retire in a bull run. Maybe you retired in 2009 and literally at the bottom. Maybe you retired in March of 2009. You're like, man, this is easy. Like my portfolio is quadrupled, over the last 10 years or whatever that might be. But you never know. No one has a crystal ball. So maybe you retire and all of a sudden it's like, hey, you kind of have this in your back pocket. You're like, all right, if it really goes down, let's say 2025 or 2026 or 2027, we go into a bear market and I just retired, you always have this potential in your back pocket to say, you know what, I'm going to avoid depleting my portfolio. Maybe that's a reason to start Social Security earlier than you anticipated, to say, hey, I'm going to bring some income into the portfolio to sort of, reduce the risk of depleting my assets when we're in a downturn. This idea of you don't want to sell when the market's down, you want to sell high, not low. So maybe you unlock Social Security as an income stream, or maybe you get a part-time job. Maybe you're a Walmart greeter or something like that. I don't know. Maybe you're working at your local, I don't know. You're doing something for part-time income. You're doing some consulting for part-time income to potentially come in to the household to either reduce or eliminate the need for portfolio withdrawals during a downturn. So I think there's a lot of financial benefits, obviously, but I think that the main ones we hit on at the beginning, the purpose, social interaction, the health benefits, not just physical health, cognitive, but also physical health benefits. There's a lot of benefits to staying engaged is what I'd call it. Because, even I'm thinking of some clients like, they're doing things that a full-time worker would do, but they're not even getting paid. They're running these nonprofits. I think this idea of working, maybe it's more of like staying engaged with something that's giving you purpose. Like Roberto, you mentioned earlier, like it's kind of, getting you out of bed in the morning. So I think that's really the key of what we're trying to highlight here is absolutely enjoy the fruits of your labor. Maybe you're like, this working I'm not working at all. I'm literally going to play golf every day. Hey, you know what? You're my kind of guy and gal. All right. So, but there may come a time you're like, you know what? I've played 300 rounds this year. Is that even possible? Yeah, I guess that is possible. 300 rounds this year and last year, but you know what? I'm kind of getting burnt out on doing this. Maybe I want to carve it down to 100. Now I have some free time. And so I just kind of thinking through what that purpose is going to be well before you fire your boss, well before you officially retire, is going to kind of get you ahead of the game and kind of get you started on that one. So like I said, we'll share that purpose questionnaire that we referenced earlier. And I hope you all find that helpful to kind of get the wheels turning. But again, I hope you all found value in this conversation. Roberto, thanks again for jumping on and having this chat. I know you were resisting for a while to jump on the podcast. So thank you for joining. And one take, baby, one take. You said, oh, we're going to do multiple takes, one take. So, that's it. But I appreciate you jumping on. Listen, if you are finding value in our content, if you're liking what we're doing here, make sure to leave a 5-star review. We don't charge it. You're not paying anything. Okay. Just leave a 5-star review. That's the only thing we ask you to do. And share this with someone else who's a PFR Nation type of caliber individual, because those individuals are probably busy. They're probably working 50, 60 hours a week. They're not thinking about, let me find a retirement focused podcast that's for me. It's like, share this with those individuals, your family members or friends, coworkers that you care about. And that way we can not only impact you, but also reach more people. The algorithm is starting to pick it up. So let's keep that momentum going. And appreciate all of you that have left a 5-star review already on both Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify. If you're interested in working with our firm one-on-one, we've got a retirement readiness survey. It's going to be linked in the show notes. Go ahead and start there. It's just some basic questions about your situation, what you're looking to accomplish, a little about your financial situation. And I'll follow up with a personalized video about areas of opportunity that I see if we were to work together, as well as if we are a good mutual fit. Alternatively, you can go to the website, our company website directly, which is www.imaginefinancialsecurity.com. And we'd love to hear from you that are looking to plan for retirement, looking for early retirement, looking to make an impact in retirement. And we'd love to help you in your retirement planning journey. And we've got some super exciting topics upcoming. And I'm going to go ahead and officially announce this. We're going to be going to weekly at some point here in this quarter, in Q1. A big part of that is, with the help of Amy and Roberto, just helping me with a lot of the details behind the scene and getting kind of helping this bit. I feel like we've got this like a well-oiled machine going on right now, with serving our clients, helping our clients. So I'm confident now that I can take a little bit more time to do more podcasting, because there's so many topics. We've got like literally a running list of topics that we want to address. And I'm like, I can't do this if it's only every other week. You know what I mean? So thank you, Roberto, for freeing up a little bit of my time. And hopefully I still have a little bit of time to play some golf in 2025. Because I'd like to log more than 6 rounds that I logged in 2025. Well, I guess maybe I logged closer to 9, but 9, that's still pathetic, relative to what I used to do back in the day. So I do want to play a little bit more golf, but we're going to go to every week on the podcast. And again, make sure to check out the YouTube as well. Subscribe to the YouTube, because we're going to continue the whiteboard fireside chats and some other content on the YouTube. Oh, and also I'll just throw out there, follow us on Instagram. We just created an Instagram account specifically for the podcast, because I had some of you connect with me on Facebook, which is fine. Like, as long as you're not creepy, I accepted your invite. Follow the show on Instagram. It's just PFR Podcast, at PFR Podcast. We'll post some shorts on there. We'll post some stories here and there. And then also some like fun memes as well. So I think you guys have been really enjoying the memes on YouTube as well as on Instagram. So check those out. I get a kick out of them when I'm making those. So anyways, I appreciate all of you. And until next time, this is Kevin Lau signing off.